And we are going to focus on Matthew 24 and 25 today. If you look down at the final, on your first page, at that final little box over on the right, I drew a square around it on your notes, just above the blue arrows. You'll notice that Matthew 24 and 25 are called the Olivet Discourse. And that is all about Jesus' return and how to, there's the blank, wait for it. So there's a little blank inside that gray box on the first page. It's right above the blue arrows. There's a dark gray box, and it says how to wait. The word should be wait. Does everybody see that? Yeah. Well, this is what I was looking at right there. Right there. Oh. So you're going to have to write over the gray. So that's what it's all about today is Jesus is returning. So how do we wait for his return? Is there a certain way in which we're supposed to wait? The answer is yes, there is. Okay, so page 2. Mark is going to help me with reading these questions.
Why are chapters 24 and 25 commonly called the Olivet Discourse?
Anyone want to take a guess? The answer is in verse 3. Yes, because that's where he is, on the Mount of Olives.
Matthew 24, 1 through 35 is one of the most difficult passages to interpret in the whole New Testament. But one thing is clear, especially in verses 29 through 31. This has to do with the...
Donna, could you read 29 to 31 of Matthew chapter 24?
Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of heaven will be shaken.
Through 31.
Through 31, okay. Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out our angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds from one end of heaven to the other.
Okay, so based on that, what do you think this section is all about? The return. Yes, the return of Jesus.
But from 24 verse 36, all the way to the end of chapter 25, Jesus presents 5 lessons about how we should
wait for him. So you get, if you can see from my pink and blue boxes, you get half a chapter about the return, and then a chapter and a half about how to wait for it. And just based on how much time Jesus spends on the teaching, you can see that how to wait for the return is much more important than knowing how the return will happen. Now you get books and books and books written about those first 35 verses because it's very interesting and there's a lot of debate about what order things will happen. But based on how much time Jesus spends, it's much more important how you wait. Because once he gets here, we can just follow his lead. We don't need to tell him what order he should do things.
So let's learn what Jesus teaches about how we should wait for his return. Number one, what are the 4 illustrations which all make similar points given in Matthew 24, verses 36 through 44?
Bev, could you read verses 36 through 44? It's kind of a long passage, so I might stop you. Just be looking for his 4 illustrations.
But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them all away. So also will the coming of the Son of Man be.
Okay. So what's the illustration there? Should be pretty simple. It's from the Old Testament. Penny, what do you think?
People are living as if he's not coming.
Yes. And the Old Testament illustration, Penny? What?
I don't think no one knows. I mean,
Right. So he's using Noah and the flood to illustrate his coming.
okay.
Yes. And the parallel between then and now, what's similar about it? Al, what did you say?
People are living as if he's not coming.
Right. The parallel, in one word, you could say normalcy. They're living as though life is normal. They're going to weddings. They're having funerals.
Well, that would be, everyone's going to be doing that, but it's, to me, it's looking at all the things going on. It's like nothing is normal.
Well, I see what you're saying, and I agree with you, but the parallel Jesus is drawing is that people are acting like life's going to go on, and everything's fine, and it's just going to keep going and going, but what's going to happen is all of a sudden life's not going to go on, just like with the flood. So that's the illustration there. Okay, Bev, keep going.
Then 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and the other left.
Okay. So there's B and C. What are those? We had Noah for A. Joan, what do you think B and C are? Donna?
The 2 women, one being taken and the other will be left.
That's C. And before that, there's a very similar illustration.
The men in the field?
Yes, 2 men. Now, in Jesus' time, there probably would have been a father and a son, or 2 brothers.
So is this speaking of Satan taking one?
Mark, could you get John a copy of the notes? Oh, never mind. We got it. There's a lot of debate about whether they'll be taken by the rapture or taken away to judgment or to battle. But what's significant here is that there will be a sudden, quick, and irreversible distinction. That's the blank. We're on page 2 of the notes. And letter C.
Well, and one of the differences too is to call him a believer. One believer or one acceptor will be taken. One who rejects will be left.
Yes. I agree with you, but there are those who think Jesus just says one's going to be taken. So some people think they're going to be taken to judgment. But Jesus is going to bring out all those reasons. Right now, he's just saying there's going to be a divide. This whole section builds up to the sheep and the goats, which we won't get to. All right, keep going, Beth. One last illustration.
Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. Therefore you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect.
So what is the illustration there?
Be ready.
Well, that's the lesson. But what illustration? We had Noah, we had 2 men, 2 women.
A thief coming.
Yes. A robbery. So, does this justify robbery? No, but what is the similarity between a robbery and our Master's return?
Had you known you were going to be robbed, you would have been watching and waiting. So you should be watching and waiting for Jesus.
Yes. Yes, I was robbed once and I was very unprepared for that. And then Roman numeral 2, under that, it is sudden and unexpected. So it happens when you're unprepared, and it is sudden and unexpected. So all 4 of those illustrations in that section work together to teach a lesson about how we should wait for Jesus.
So the lesson we learn from all 4 illustrations about how to wait for Jesus is this. Wait for him as those who do not wish to be
Unpleasantly surprised. Now, if you've ever been caught by your boss, like I was once reading a novel when I was supposed to be watching the pool as a lifeguard. There was no one in the pool, but I was still supposed to be watching and not reading a book. That gives you a very, very small example of being unpleasantly surprised by their master's return. Because they weren't ready. If I'd have known my boss was going to come around, I would have been watching the pool. The empty pool.
What concepts are carried forward from the previous lesson?
Oh, we need to read the next one first before we do that. So, Bev, you did such a great job. Can you read verses 45 through 51? We're on the top of page 3 now.
Who then is a faithful and wise servant whom his master made ruler over his household to give them food in due season? Blessed is that servant whom his master, when he comes, will find so doing. Assuredly I say to you that he will make him ruler over all his goods. But if that evil servant says in his heart, my master is delaying his coming, and begins to beat his fellow servants and to eat and drink with the drunkards, the master of that servant will come on a day when he is not looking for him, and at an hour that he is not aware of, and will cut him in two, and appoint him his portion with the hypocrites. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
Yes. Cut him into, what did it say?
Cut him in two.
Oh, cut him in 2. TWO?
TWO.
Okay.
At least that's on mine.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. I don't have a Bible in front of me. I was unprepared for this. So, what concepts are carried forward from the previous lesson? Anybody notice any? Each one is going to carry some concepts. And so Jesus, as he builds these lessons, he keeps expounding.
Be ready, take it seriously.
Okay, be ready. Yeah, because the bad steward who was in charge wasn't ready. And there's one more that's related to that. And that is an unexpected arrival. It's the time of arrival that's unexpected. In this case.
So the lessons we learn from the parable about how to wait for Jesus is this. Wait for him as stewards who must give an
account. They have to give an account of their service, faithful or otherwise. In that case, he had been given a job to do, and he had not done it. And so his master was angry when he returned. So we're going to give an account. So the point here is we are all waiting for Jesus' return. And I don't want to be like that steward who was put in charge of some things and he didn't do a good job with it. Because I will give an account.
leadership and power are always easy to abuse ever since the fall. Even Christian leadership positions like pastors, teachers, people of influence, parents, even these can be manipulated and self-serving. Matthew 25.
Oh, hold on right there. So, has anyone ever known a Christian who was in charge of something and they used it for their own advantage over other people? Yes. I mean, many people have. If you haven't, praise God. But you probably will at some point. So that's very important.
So in what way are they manipulative?
They use their position to make their life better, even if it makes other people's lives worse.
Power and authority. The bakers were example of that.
Oh, yeah. Yes, Jim Baker. But I was thinking on a very small scale. Sometimes, you know, if my family's sitting down and we need to go get something, I'll say, Kathleen, go get this. Because I don't want to get up, so I make her get up. So, I mean, that's a very small example, but we do that all the time. Right?
Usually the one that gets out.
Yeah. Has anyone, I mean, it's just the way our world works. If you're in any kind of position and there's...
Husbands like to do that to their wives.
That's true. Husbands and wives. If you're in a position where there's a certain amount of slots available, you let your kid get one of those slots. Because, well, you're making the list. You put your kids on the list first, and then whatever room there is for other people. You see what I mean? I'm just saying, or you let your friends, like, hey, I can get you an employee discount because I work there even though you don't.
You put yourself first.
That happens a lot, yes. Okay, number 3. Lesson number 3.
Matthew 25, 1 through 13.
Oh, yes. Okay, Bev, can you read those?
Then the kingdom of heaven shall be likened to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. Now 5 of them were wise and 5 were foolish. Those who were foolish took their lamps and took no oil with them. But the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. But while the bridegroom was delayed, they all slumbered and slept. And at midnight a cry was heard, Behold, the bridegroom is coming. Go out to meet him. Then all those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the wise, Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out. But the wise answered, saying, No, at least there should not be enough for us and you, but go rather to those who sell and buy for yourselves. And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the wedding, and the door was shut. Afterward, the other virgins came also, saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. But he answered and said, Assuredly I say to you, I do not know you. Which therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man is coming.
So, which ones went to meet the bridegroom? Which virgins?
The wise.
Prepared ones.
They all were waiting to meet him. And which ones arrived on time?
The ones that were ready.
Ones that are prepared.
All 10. There's 5 wise and 5 foolish, but they all went to meet him. They all got there on time. Which ones fell asleep while they were waiting? All 10. So what was the major difference between the wise and the foolish?
Half of them were prepared and the other half weren't.
Prepared for the length of time which they didn't know.
Right.
The other ones assumed it would be within, you fill your lamp, you know it's only going to last 3-4 hours.
Right.
We're prepared for longer wait.
So this parable turns everything around and looks at it from the other side. The other one said, he might come quick, so watch out. But this one says, he might not come quick, so prepare that it might be long. You see the difference?
Could that be steady as you go? And you don't?
Well, before we get into how it plays out, let's just skip down to the box, the black box, Mark.
So from this parable, the lesson we learn about how to wait for Jesus is this. Wait for him as those who know, wait for him as those who know their master's coming may be long.
Delayed. Maybe long delayed. We need to be like people who know their master's coming may, we don't know, but it may be long delayed. If you live as though Jesus is coming 1 month from now, then your job is to get as many people saved as possible. But if it may be 200 years from now, then you better disciple the people who are already Christians so that they can pass it on to others. It's a long-term strategy. If he's coming in a month, why would you start discipling people? You just got to go share the gospel. Do you see the difference? There's 2 things we're supposed to do. We're supposed to share the gospel and disciple and encourage and serve our church. But I'm not going to spend time comforting a lonely person. If Jesus is coming in 1 week, I'm just going to be out on the streets witnessing. But it might be long. So we have to do both. We have to be prepared for both.
The problem I have with this passage is that all 10 of them apparently knew Jesus and came with the other group that were prepared. Yet, were they not true Christians because they weren't allowed into the marriage supper?
When they knock, what does the master say? Can you read that part?
I didn't know you.
Yeah.
I know you not.
He didn't.
But he answered and said, Assuredly I say to you, I do not know you.
So they didn't
were
know.
Not,
They thought they were Christians. They thought they knew Jesus. We had that in the Sermon on the Mount. Lord, Lord,
we did this, that, and the other.
we did things in your name. I never knew you. We had that in the parable of the wheat and the tares. There's going to be people both who look like they might be children of the kingdom. But at the end, when the harvest comes, find out who is and who isn't. Also, you can tell by the fruit. Right? So if you just see a bunch of people sitting in church, you don't know what fruit's in their life and what's not. But as you get to know people and you start to see, things like bitterness and stinginess and greed, and you meet somebody else and you start to see things like patience and joy and love and kindness and generosity. Some people have, one person has the fruit of the Spirit, the other person doesn't. Even then, though, you can't be positive because it could be that a year ago this person was less bitter. I'm sorry, I said that backwards. A year ago that person was even more bitter than they are now. And God is working in their life. But it's just a slower process for them. So that is also why Jesus says, don't judge. Just leave that up to God's judgment.
That's right.
Because you don't know.
Jacob, going back to the delay, I think all of us who grew up in Christian homes were told living as if Jesus was coming. And I can remember my mother saying over and over, I think I'll see Jesus in my time. And yet look at the delay.
Yes. So we don't know. But we have both sides here. Live as though it might be soon and live as though it might be delayed. So we did have a generation who focused on just soul winning and not on discipleship. And that didn't get us very far. I mean, look at how the church has just crumbled in America. Because the end all was sharing the gospel. And it wasn't discipleship. So we have to do both. Okay, now back to the green box. What concepts in the 10 virgins parable, what concepts are carried forward from the previous lessons?
Be prepared.
Prepare for the long term.
Not being ready or not being prepared. Again, an unexpected arrival. And again, a distinction, like the 2 men and the 2 women. So he's picking up themes, but showing it from the other side in that one. Okay, now we come to the last one. There's 5, but we're only going to do 4 today. Come to the last one that we'll spend the most time on. So let's just read it a bit at a time. Bev, could you read 14 and 15a, so halfway through that verse?
And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come.
Are you in 25?
No. 25:14. For the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country who called his own servants and delivered his goods to them. And to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to their own ability, and immediately he went on a journey.
What is a talent? Does anyone remember?
Measure of weight.
It's a measure of weight. So how much is a talent worth?
Bag of gold.
Yeah.
Day's wages?
No, 20 years' wages.
1 talent?
1 talent, yeah. So you got about 70 pounds. Now, it doesn't say whether it's a silver or gold talent. If it's a silver talent, it's 20 years of wages. So millions of dollars. If it's a gold talent, it's hundreds of millions of dollars. And the first one got 5 talents. And these three people, it says servants. Are they servants or slaves?
Servants.
It says servants, but the word is slave. We'll talk about why they put servant instead. Letter C, Mark.
Slavery in the ancient world was not tied to skin color in any way.
Now that's different from American slavery, isn't it? In the ancient world, you'd have, people from Africa attacking Egypt, making people slaves. You'd have people from Egypt attacking Greece and making people slaves.
Really?
You had, okay, so it's not tied to skin color. Letter D.
It's still that way over here now. You can still go buy a slave.
Yes. Slavery, American slavery was a very unique situation. Letter D, Mark.
Slavery in the ancient world was not tied exclusively to kidnapping.
So American slaves were captured. And that did happen.
But their own people sold them,
Not always.
but a lot.
Sometimes other tribes would attack a tribe and go to the coast and sell it to a slaving ship.
You never hear that though, do you?
Sometimes they would just land and capture people. That did happen in the ancient world, but in the ancient world, sometimes if you borrowed money and then the economy tanked, and then there's no way you borrowed money to buy a farm or business of some kind, and then all of a sudden all your cattle get sick and die that you spent all that money on, and now you have no way to pay it back. There's no bankruptcy laws in the ancient world like we have. So your only option then was to sell yourself and your family as slaves, maybe just yourself, maybe just one of your children, whatever, to pay off the debt. So sometimes slavery was that. Okay, so very different from American slavery. Okay. Now letter E says the Greek word doulos clearly means slave, but based on points C and D, why might it be permissible for the translators to say servant instead?
Because of what you just explained.
Right. They say if we put slave here, there's going to be 330 million readers who are going to have a wrong image in their mind when they read that word. So maybe we can help them understand what this is actually saying by putting the word servant.
Does that mean they treated the slaves worse than they did the servants?
There were no servants in the ancient world. There was only slaves. They were all slaves.
So it was voluntary and involuntary, sort of. I mean,
You were-
I voluntarily offer my services because I need money from my family.
Sometimes you won a battle and you took the leftovers as slaves. So it was both back then. It was mixed. You didn't know. Let's see. Okay, letter F.
But here, it is important to understand that these are slaves.
Right. This story, it won't make sense if you think of them as servants. And letter G.
In the ancient world, some slaves were highly educated, sometimes much more than the master, were skilled.
But how were they treated?
It depended on the situation.
And on the master, some people would volunteer to be servants to, someone who was rich and getting richer. You get to know people working for him, like, oh, he takes care of me, man. I'll work for you.
So,
That they-
But if they were slaves, tells me they weren't treated very well.
well,
And that's our,
Well, see,
that would
that's-
be our interpretation, because some were left the entire inheritance of the person that they were
Really?
serving or slaving for, yeah. And the Bible speaks several times of that.
in a house,
You're saying that it was written that way because of Western ignorance? Because it's still like that in most of the world today. You can
the
still
word
call
servant,
people slaves.
the word servant was used because they know the majority of English speakers have a preconceived idea of what slavery is that doesn't accurately represent what was going on. Now it might, sometimes it was bad, sometimes it was good. In a household economy, you had children and then you had your slaves.
So what was Joseph? Was he a servant or a slave?
He was a slave. He was sold as a slave by his brothers. Now, he ended up running the whole household for Potiphar.
Because he was a good, honest
Oh,
man.
right. So he was educated. I mean, he was brought up by a wealthy man, and he was skilled. So sometimes that would happen. And then again, if you went to the market and there was people being sold, and they would say, this guy's a really strong worker. This guy is really smart. He can read and write. He's really good at math. This guy used to be a businessman. He's really business savvy. And so you would buy, I need someone who can run my businesses. So you would buy people to do tasks for you. And that's what's going on here. And the master knows how skilled they each are. That's why one gets 5, one gets 2, and one gets 1, each according to their ability. Marnie?
Is this referring to bond and free slaves? The fact that sometimes they were held, and other times they were there because they freely wanted to be there.
Well, right. Sometimes they were there by capture, and they didn't want to be there, but that was their situation now. From battle, there's way more warfare in the ancient world. They loved warfare, but it's crazy. But anyway, and sometimes, they had to sell themselves, or sometimes they were sold by their family. And sometimes, after they had worked off a certain debt, or someone came to redeem them, and someone said, hey, he owes you X amount of money, and that's why he's your slave. I'm going to pay it to redeem him back from you. And sometimes when that happened, they said, actually, I would rather keep being a slave for this guy, because I mean, slaves could own money back then. You could get wealthy as a slave. It was just a lot different. But ideally, you didn't want to be a slave. Ideally, you wanted to have your own family, your own children, maybe your own slaves.
Jacob, in this example, however, this man entrusted his property to them.
Mm-hmm.
You have to know that they were trusted and were more like...
And 2 of them were trustworthy, but 1 was not. Yes. That's why in Ephesians, at the end of Ephesians, he goes through the household, husbands and wives, children and parents, slaves and masters. Right? Are you familiar with, at the end of Ephesians? Children submit to your parents, wives submit to your husbands, slaves submit to your masters. That's the household. It was very normal. It doesn't mean it was ideal. We're going to get into more of the slavery thing as we go. But bear in mind, some of these slaves were educated and skilled. Okay, Bev, 15 and 16.
15, I read that, I'll read it again. And to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his own ability, and immediately he went on a journey. Then he who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them, and made another 5 talents.
Okay, now my translation had went and put the money to work. Okay, so there's no stock market. If I got 5 talents, which each were millions and millions of dollars. So let's say I have $100 million that someone says, Jacob, here's $100 million. I want you to use this money to get me more money. I would just put it in the stock market. And I'd probably get an advisor to tell me how to break it up. But there was no stock market. So, now if it was a small amount of money, you could just say, you know what, I'm going to buy a bunch of goats, and then they'll all have babies, so by the time my master gets back, I'll go from 50 goats to 500 goats, if he's gone a long time. But this is so much money. You can buy a herd of cattle and hope that they reproduce well and all of that. But that's not going to cost you $100 million. So you could buy that. Okay, you know what? This farm has been doing really good. I'm going to buy this farm too. And then you're managing that and making sure the crops, setting people in charge. And then maybe you're going to go say, oh, you know what? This little blacksmith guild right here, they're really good. This guy's really good at training his worker. I'm going to buy this blacksmith guild. I'm going to get him everything he needs. And it's still only 10% of your money. You're doing all kinds of things to put this money to work. In other words, it's a lot of work to take that much money and invest it well. So that's a very important concept. So two things. Number one, it was a lot of work to invest this money and a lot of managing. Number two, these people were slaves and they were told to do this. Okay, page 4. Can you read 17 through 19, Bev?
And likewise, he who had received 2 gained 2 more also. But he who had received 1 went and dug in the ground and hid his Lord's money. After a long time, the Lord of those servants came and settled accounts with them. So he who
Hold on. So what are some concepts that are picked up from previous lessons?
The Lord is coming back.
Yes, the Lord is coming back.
Invest wisely.
Yeah, well, that's a lesson we can learn from it. But just stuff picked up. What did it say? After a long time, he came back. So that's picking up from the 10 virgins. In this case, it was a long delay. And then settled accounts with his servants. We are going to have to give an account. Remember the very second lesson? We're going to have to give an account for what we did with what we had. Now, Bev, could you read verse 20?
So he who had received 5 talents came and brought 5 other talents, saying, Lord, you delivered to me 5 talents. Look, I've gained 5 more talents besides them.
Do you detect a note of satisfaction in a job well done?
You're pleasing your master.
Well, you know, it reminds you of people today. There are some people that are very conscientious and they will do the right thing, and some are just lazy. And they just don't want to be bothered, like this last guy.
Yes, but let's try to get the lesson. That's true, and that's important, but let's try to get the lesson that Jesus is saying about how we should wait for him. So verse 21.
His Lord said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things, I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord.
Yeah. Come share your master's happiness. That's very unusual. What would a normal master's response be?
Just to thank you and take it from him. You did your job. I'm rich. See you later.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was
Here's-
education, you give
here-
them some of it.
Here's a little bonus. Now take the 10 talents and make me 20. Yes. So, This might be a very unique type of slavery that Jesus is describing. In other words, he might take a normal analogy and change it. Just like you might if you were like trying to explain something. Like to a child, sometimes you say, well, imagine you were in school, but in this situation you had 5 teachers. And you're trying to explain something. Like, that's what it's like for me because I have 5 bosses or whatever. Right? So he's taking things and he's kind of changing the normal to them. They're like, whoa, this master in this story is like different. Or at least what Jesus is describing is the best possible kind of slavery. So that word would be best in the blank.
Jacob, if, well, I had it in my brain. Never mind.
Okay. That's okay if you think of it. The best possible kind of slavery with an intimate bond between master and slave. The slave is part of the family. That didn't always happen. And the slave wants the master's interest to be advanced. He wants to make his master happy. Every human being is a slave to something. You are either a slave to sin and self, or you're a slave to Jesus Christ. Now, a yoke was a symbol of slavery. You put a yoke on an animal to make it work for you. What did Jesus say about his yoke and his slavery?
Said it was easy and light.
He said it was.
Our yoke.
Well, yes.
Your burden is heavy, but his burden is light.
Yeah. So he's like, take my yoke, and my yoke is easy, my burden is light. You're going to have a yoke from someone. And his slavery is rest for your souls. You want to serve him. You don't do it because you're trying to earn your way. You do it because you want to. And serving Jesus is what makes you truly free. So the lesson, Mark?
Wait for Jesus as slaves commissioned to
Improve their master's assets. It's very tempting to wait for Jesus like people who are trying to improve their own assets. Sometimes we do that in the name of wisdom. Okay.
You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. How much money was the few things?
A lot. You've been faithful with $50 million. Just a few things. And then the next part, Mark?
If that is a little to this master, then his master must be rich beyond any normal richness that the people were familiar with. The parable almost bursts the boundaries of human understanding.
So what does it represent when he says, in our world, what does it represent when he says, I will put you in charge of many things? What is he talking about?
the gospel?
Well, that's the few things. Because the master giving them the massive amounts of money represents us now, and the master goes away. And with the few things, we do that stuff. Then the master comes back, which represents Jesus' return. And the master says, what did you do with those few things? Even though it was a lot. And the one who did well, he says, well done. You've been faithful with a few things. I'm going to put you in charge of many things. What does that represent Jesus saying to us at his return?
That he'll give us more responsibility in his kingdom.
Yes.
What did she
That-
say?
That he'll give us more responsibility in his future kingdom, where he's actually here on earth. So, in a word, it's the afterlife.
Gotcha.
The afterlife.
The afterlife is not pictured as static or repetitive. It is pictured as work, rewarding, satisfying work, growing, building toward the future.
Okay. How many have ever had a mental image of heaven as just like very repetitive, everything stays the same? Maybe you're strumming a harp.
Sitting on the
You know-
Sitting on-
You know what, I just had that question asked to me today. I was at the gym and this man, he's a Catholic, and I'm trying to talk to him about the Lord. He said, well, what is heaven really going to be like? He said, can you play golf there? Can you do what I said, it's going to be beyond your conception. It's going to be so wonderful. He couldn't understand. Is there some passage that I could show him that would describe heaven?
Yeah, there are. I mean, I would go to Revelation, the last 2 chapters of the Bible.
Okay, last 2 chapters, okay.
Um,
I'm going
but
to give him a Bible,
but that is
because he never read it.
Oh, wow.
that is one
He's Catholic.
image. The Bible gives lots of images for the afterlife. That's one of them. A city. It's described as a city. And in a city, okay, ancient cities were very small, like the size of our church property, with a wall around it. Everybody knew everybody. In some ways, heaven is described as a city, so interaction. In this situation, heaven is described as new tasks.
Well, if it says Jesus is not, heaven's gonna be the streets of gold.
That is another...
Well, his thing was, well, what are you going to do there? I mean,
Right, and that's where this is an important illustration, because we're not just going to be like, oh, look at these streets, this is great.
we're going to have jobs to do, right?
We're going to have jobs and tasks, but because there's no more curse, it won't be the frustrating kind of work, like when you're working on something and just before you click save, it gets deleted. Anybody, that ever happened to anyone? It's it's so frustrating, and that kind of thing just happens, and you have to do it again. It's not going to have those kinds of frustrations. There won't be weeds. You might be growing things, but there will be no weeds.
But I got to tell him is first you got to get there before you worry about what it's like.
Yes. So, this is pictured as work and responsibility, but much more. So he says, all you had was $100 million. Now you're going to get a real job. Do you see how that pushes the limits of like what we can conceptualize? And all the biblical descriptions of eternity with God, they all do that. Are the streets literally going to be paved with gold? Maybe. Maybe it'll be literal gold, but maybe it's describing something that it's hard for us to picture. When Jesus says you're storing up treasure in heaven, I don't really care if I have a chest full of treasure, diamonds and gems.
Yeah, I don't think it means money.
So it might mean something other than money, but he uses treasure as an illustration that we can understand. It's something really good that you're going to want to have there, whatever that is.
I believe it might be, I've had a few times in my career when I was assigned to do something, and I do it so well that everybody who worked with me and my boss was like, really? You even painted it? You even shined it? You've got special cables to hook up that'll never break? Well, yeah, you told me to make this whiz bang and I wanted to make it the best I possibly could.
So here's more work for you to do.
Right, but the satisfaction of doing that was incredible.
Yeah.
I've had my manager tell other people, well, he's going on break. He can go on break anytime he wants to. You leave him alone. He does his job, and he does it well.
You get praise, you get fulfillment because the Lord says, well done, good and faithful servant.
But then one of the even better things is when someone else is like, what's up with this? Because I've had people like, why do you do this? Like, well, when I'm sitting here in my office alone, I'm looking at stuff and figuring things out, getting ideas. Every time I come up with another step or something,
So
I stop and I pray, Lord, is
other people
this the way I should go?
that'll
Is
be
this,
in heaven.
should I do this? Is this?
What's your point?
And they were like, really? Well, yeah, I always ask. And sometimes he actually, shows me through circumstances or something. So my whole point is I'm not looking at this as just building a whiz bang. Looking at this as building one that God would be proud of. Because he gave me this job. And it kind of blew a lot of people's minds.
So by doing a good job now, you're able to share the gospel, you're able to give a testimony to people, and it also gives you a foretaste, the satisfaction in doing a good job, gives you a foretaste of how we will be able to interact with Jesus Christ in his coming kingdom.
Yeah, I just want to say that the fallen man just struggles so much with trying to understand perfection, Christ's perfection. And Christ's perfection in heaven. We understand Christ's perfection, but we have to put that perfection in fleshly terms. We don't understand the spiritual terms that Christ is using and the full meaning of what Christ is conveying. On purpose. Believe it's on purpose. It's making us wonder. It's making us yearn for what's to come. And I think it's just it's contentment. It's peace. It offers us something to look very much forward to.
Something we rarely see in life.
Yeah.
And it's never material when you do find it. That's one thing that really impressed upon me, trying to understand. It's untouchable, it's unknowable in our wisdom.
Okay, the last page, very briefly. We're going to skip that first paragraph and say, the big question is, how do you profitably invest so much? Now, remember he said to the wicked, lazy servant at the end, which we didn't read, you could have at least put it in the bank and gotten interest. You could have at least done something. There's going to be a great, among true believers and true followers, there will be a great spectrum, with like the Apostle Paul at one end, and me probably at the other end. But but along that spectrum, some people, at least they did something. At least you said something. At least you gave something. But it's so much. Remember, it's difficult. The reason it was so much work for those servants, those slaves, is because it was so much money. So, this unfathomably rich master represents God, and the talents represent everything we are, everything we're given. That's our lives, our abilities, our friendships, our souls, His image, and the gospel message.
It is crucial.
No, we're down at, and we are commanded.
And we are commanded to use all of it to advance God's kingdom. We are commanded to improve our master's assets, not our own, with everything we are and have. Personality, ability, talents, circumstances, time, our energy, everything. True followers of Jesus, true slaves of Jesus,
Joyfully recognize their role.
and take a kind of humble satisfaction in their work and accomplishment, a joy they got to help.
A joy that they got to help.
I apologize.
Like my kids, no, it's okay. When I'm working on something, and they're like, "Can I help?" And I'm like, "I wish you could." So sometimes I give them like a fool's errand, and I say, "Yeah, you can help. Can you run and get the extension cord?" And I don't really need it. And then I thank them for helping, because they want to help.
It makes them feel useful.
Yeah. And so that's a picture of how true Christians are. I want to do something, God, for your kingdom. And God says, okay, I'm going to give you a task that you can do. It might be very small.
Go back up to the top. The 10 virgins failed by thinking their part was too
Easy.
big.
Too easy.
Oh, too easy.
He was like, oh, just go down there and wait with our lamps. It's easy.
And then this slave fails by thinking his part is
It's too hard. He doesn't try. He's like, that is going to be so much work. I've got $5 million here. I'm just going to bear it.
Dig a hole.
I'm just going to dig a hole and bury it, and then that way I can't lose any. Don't want to take any chances. Don't want to take any risks for my master. Waiting for Jesus, this is down at the bottom, is never merely passive. Think of the letting your light shine and the Sermon on the Mount and the Great Commission at the end of the book. We should hunger for His approval, not human approval. Hunger is never passive. Real hunger. I don't mean like, it's 10 o'clock at night and it'd be fun to get some chips, Sal. That's not hunger. People in the ancient world knew what real hunger was. And it's never passive. It's never like, yeah, I mean, I haven't eaten in 2 days, but if some food lands on my plate, I'll eat it. It's never passive. It's always active. This is what God expects of us. So it is our job to look at what we have and figure out how to invest it for Him. it may be that all of us will end up in a situation where the only thing we can do is pray as our bodies fail more and more.
Yeah, but that's.
I know, it is. Now, when we get to that point, when I'm always talking to my kids about this. They're like, thanks, Dad. And I'm like, okay, but you better do that for me when I'm in a nursing home. And they laugh because they think, oh, that's so far away. And I'm like, that's
living in your house.
I'm like, that's coming up. But it may be that you will get to that point, probably, where we can't really do anything, and you can either be like, well, nothing I can do for God now, or you may do what you can.